fantasy football season has finally come to an end, but now we got to prep for the playoffs, and we're here to help you, and we're here to also look back at the amazing fantasy season that we had. Welcome back to Pass the Rock.
Could one of y'all pass the gosh darn rock? Hey yo, I'm trying, I ain't lying, and hosting this will be Brian. Posting like Kobe Bryant, flying to see the pie. Hit the hezzy, we got Jesse, opinions get kinda messy. A fan of out of lefties, from football to racing jet skis. He go silly when he go deep, sheesh, is Zach Zeman. Teaming up with Jack, we stack the whole team, man. Pass the rock, don't stop the shot clock. Smack the slap shot, come on, now let's talk. Pass the, yo partner, pass the rock, for real.
We're in December. It's getting chillier. I'm wearing my beanie, because it's getting nice and cold up here in the mountains where I am. But Jack, how are you doing tonight?
Oh man, I'm doing good. I'm struggling through finals week, but that means we're that much closer to winter break and free time and free football, which is all you can ask for. And I'm excited to get into some fantasy talk.
Oh, I'm in the exact same boat that you are. Finals week have been rough, but we're getting through it. We're going to get our grades all the way up as high as we can. Make sure our mothers are, very proud of us, our nice Jewish mothers.
Exactly.
But yeah, let's get into it. Jack, we always start the show with how we did in the previous week. Jack, how was your final week of fantasy football for most leagues? It's the final regular season. Some apps do it a little differently. I know ESPN. This last week. That was the last week of the regular season. I know on Yahoo we still have week 15 to play regular season. Kind of weird to me, but it works out. Jack, how was the end of your regular season?
Yeah, we kind of stumbled the finish line a little bit at the end here. I went 1-2 this past week. Managed to get in my main league with a loss into the playoffs, which is really nice. Even I was sort of in a Monday night sweater. I was in with a win, ended up losing the game. But I ended up getting in by outscoring the guy that I was competing with by 9 total points on the season, which is pretty insane. And the only reason I was able to do that was because he had Kyler Murray and he went down on Monday night. So absolutely brutal for him, but I'll take it. And yeah, that definitely brightened up my week.
God, that is such a brutal way to lose out on a fantasy playoff spot. I went 2-3. Again, not a great week for me, but every single playoff caliber roster had already clinched a spot. I was fighting for positioning though a little bit. I have one team in a 6-man playoff format. We were the 2 seed for weeks on end, but I lost by 1 point, and I didn't have the scoring to outmatch the other 9-5 guy. So I lost my bye week, the last possible moment, by like a point. So you never know with fantasy. It happens. It really does.
Yeah. Watch you lose to that 6 seed now.
Watch. It'll happen. It'll happen. I'm the 3 seed. I'm losing to the 6 seed somehow.
Guaranteed.
That would be an awful way to end a relatively great season. So,
tragic.
But speaking of great seasons, let's get into the players who shined the most this season at each position. We have a list of the top 5 players from every single position, every single mainly offensive position. We didn't include defenses or kickers because really you can get a new one every single week. Doesn't really matter who you have half the time. So let's start with the quarterbacks. Jack, do you want to go over the best quarterbacks we had this year?
Yeah. So our top 5 here, we got Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Justin Fields, which is probably not quite how we were expecting it to shake out at the beginning of the season. I mean, Jalen Hurts is definitely a great surprise in first place. I mean, if you took him, he's definitely a big. I probably guarantee that you're in the playoffs if you have Jalen Hurts, honestly, because that was a great value pick. Justin Fields, he probably got off the waiver wire, which is insane. Definitely a pretty wild season for quarterbacks. But what stuck out to you, Zach, as far as the quarterbacks this season?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, on our main show, I predicted that Jalen Hurts would be, an MVP candidate. Not only has he been an MVP candidate for, just the NFL in general, he is our most valuable player in fantasy football. He put up the most points. He averaged the most points, far and away the best quarterback. he was you. I mean, you could see him going anywhere in like the 5th to 8th round in the drafts before the season started. Anyone who got him, I got him on 3 teams. He balled out for me. He was amazing. I actually had a team that accidentally auto drafted Hurts and Murray back-to-back rounds, and I couldn't get rid of Murray because I couldn't really justify just dropping him. But Hurts always started over Murray, and Hurts always did better. So that's pretty impressive, especially considering that Kyler Murray was seen as a top 5 quarterback before the season. Now it's Justin Fields, of all people.
Yeah, I mean, Justin Fields, I mean, what an incredible steal if you were able to get him off the waivers this year. I mean, we'll get into that a little bit later, but he was one of the top guys in the league at quarterback this season, and definitely a big waiver wire guy. I just, yeah, what is Joe Burrow is another guy that was probably not expected to be a top 5 quarterback at the beginning of the year. And
Yeah.
my God, has he been impressive this season? I mean, and obviously Mahomes and Allen, we expected to be right up there. So, yeah, definitely a fun season for quarterbacks. It's always fun when you have those like breakout guys that get up there and it's not just your usual suspects.
Mm-hmm. Well, moving on to the running backs, our top 5 consists of Austin Eckler at 1, Josh Jacobs at 2, then followed by some usual top draft picks, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, and Saquon Barkley. Jack, what's your biggest takeaway from that top 5 running backs group?
Well, I mean, the biggest takeaway is definitely Josh Jacobs. I mean, what an unbelievable season he had, a contract year for him. So God knows he'll get paid this offseason. Who knows if it'll be from the Raiders or from someone else. But
Raiders.
If they're smart. But I mean, they did decline his 5th-year option for some reason.
True.
So
we are talking about the Raiders, but I really can't see Josh Jacobs in a non-Raiders uniform right now. I
don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if he just decides to stick it to the Raiders for sort of spiting him and declining that 5th-year option and getting big money from someone else. But another guy that sort of stands out to me here is Saquon. He really wasn't talked about enough this season. He definitely was a bona fide top 5 running back this year, as we normally expect him to be, but he was actually healthy this year. Like he played a full season, which is pretty much all you can ask from Saquon at this point in his career. And he was very impressive. I mean, there's no other way to put it. Good for him because he really needed that.
Yeah, well, my biggest takeaway is a little bit different. I'm pretty much looking at everyone except Josh Jacobs on this list because everyone else was a 1st round, 2nd round you were picking McCaffrey, Eckler, and Henry in the 1st round, and Saquon would maybe fall to the 2nd. Maybe. That was a huge maybe. Yeah. What I'm seeing here is that drafting a top running back is still as important as ever. You might get lucky with your occasional Josh Jacobs, but 4 of the top 5 were pretty much 1st-round picks. If you want a top 5 running back, and it's crazy that it's top 5, not even like, it's pretty thin still as a whole. Running back's always been thin, but you want a top 5 guy, you have to take running back in the 1st round. And even though not all these guys I would consider league winners, they're still, you start them every single week. They're workhorses. Saquon surprised me as being a workhorse running back again in fantasy, maintaining his health this year. But this just shows like 0 running backs it's a strategy that rarely ever works. If you're a playoff team without one of these top 5 running backs, I'd be very impressed. I mean, I know there's 6 spots in a lot of leagues, but it's still hard to construct a team without one of these core 5 guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely right. And I mean, that's just a drafting philosophy that I've always stood by, that like you absolutely need to get like your first pick under almost every circumstance should be a running back. I just think that this proves it here. I mean, you're totally, other than Jacobs, like you said, these top guys are all high-end first-round talent running backs. And I mean, it just holds true. You're exactly right. If you want to be a successful fantasy team, you got to take running back early. And I think that this year definitely supported that.
Yeah, and I know that there were a few misses early, with not Christian McCaffrey. Jonathan Taylor was a miss and Najee Harris was a miss, but you're looking at a relatively really good chance of getting a top talent for the year when you draft a running back in the 1st round. So, that's just advice for all the managers who, took Jonathan Taylor 1st overall instead of Christian McCaffrey, because, I mean, While Christian McCaffrey was not the top running back this year, he was third. Still a top 3 running back versus a top 20. So yeah, very interesting. Jack, who were our top wide receivers of the year?
Yeah, the top receivers this year were honestly pretty predictable for the most part. It was Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, and A.J. Brown. Those are 5 guys that I think are pretty predictable. I mean, A.J. Brown might be the only one that was like a little bit of a surprise, but then again, you expect him to be a top 10 receiver. So like him jumping into the top 5, while impressive, is not that mind-blowing. It's just I think what this proves as far as receivers go is that like they're generally pretty easy to project, and they're also really deep. I mean, there's outside of those top 5, there's a good handful of at least 10 other receivers that were big impact guys this year. I mean, like we're talking like Jamar Chase is a guy that was left off this list. There's I mean, Cooper Kupp, although he got injured while he was healthy, was absolutely a top 5 receiver. There's I mean, Jalen Waddle was a guy that had a huge season. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, the receiver position is very deep for fantasy, which I think, again, supports why you should be taking running backs at the top end of the first round, and why the zero RB strategy is just generally not a good idea, because the receivers are just so deep, and you also just know that you can get these high-end receivers like in the second and third round and don't have to use a first-round pick on them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm looking at the rankings. Outside of those top 5, you had Amon-Ra St. Brown at 6, CeeDee Lamb at 7. Tyler Lockett somehow was 8th, which is crazy to me that Tyler Lockett is still a top 10 fantasy receiver.
That's Cooper really impressive.
Cooper Kupp, even with his injury, he's still ranked as wide receiver 9. Christian Kirk at 10, Jalen Waddle at 11, and I'll stop at DK Metcalf being 12th. Those are all legitimate top wide receiver options, which I'm surprised that Tyler Lockett's on that list.
I've just got to say that the fact that there are 2 Seahawks in the top 12 is just a testament to how
absolutely
awesome insane this year. I mean, that's incredible. The Seahawks, given all the question marks surrounding them coming into the year, how far DK fell on draft boards because of the quarterback situation, that's pretty incredible. They had 2 in the top 12.
Oh, yeah. DK Metcalf in my one league was drafted in like the 5th round, which is absolutely insane. What an absolute steal with DK Metcalf falling that far. But, I mean, it just shows you that wide receiver is at the very least around twice as deep as running back, because I'm sure there's still legitimate, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 options people are looking at if I went further down. Like Jamar Chase is ranked 14th, but he was injured. So you could argue he's a top 10 fantasy option. I just think, it goes to show, like you said, wide receivers are generally a bit easier to project. I mean, barring injury, they're still fantastic talents. They will get the ball. They will produce for you. Justin Jefferson actually outscored Austin Eckler this year, so the production's pretty similar overall. But yeah, it's the same level of talent. It's just the amount of talent that's out there.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that really goes to show that zero RB is it's a very gutsy strategy that rarely works out. Yeah. I mean, unless you got Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams in your first 2 rounds, it's going to be really hard to build a contender.
Well, I mean, you need that, and then you also need to hit on a guy like a Kenneth Walker, right?
That's true.
You're like relying on your ability to get someone in the later rounds that turns out to be a top tier running back.
And I mean, like, running back wasn't like terrible, but like that would have to be a guy like Ramondre Stevenson or Miles Sanders that you would get, or Leonard Fournette, who was RB13. Like,
maybe you got lucky with Josh Jacobs,
and Josh Jacobs, and I mean, of course, that was the crown jewel of late round picks this year. But it's just very interesting to see, because I've always heard, like, there's the more traditional path, and then there's zero RB. There's like the 2 main big draft strategies. Everyone has their own little strategy, but I think those are the 2 big ones. You go running back or wide receiver in the first round.
Yeah.
It's a big decision, and it should always be running back. But let's move away from running backs and wide receivers. Let's talk about the top tight ends this year, and first place ran away with it. Jack, go over our top 5 tight ends.
Yep. So we've got Travis Kelce, and then everyone else. That's pretty much what it is. But I will go through the rest of the top 5. After Kelce, it was Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, Evan Engram, and Pat Freiermuth. Pretty interesting to see Engram and Freiermuth in there in the top 5. Engram, of course, jumping up after his ridiculous 40-point performance this past week. He had such a strange season. He had a lot of weeks where he was completely ineffective, and then he had a couple weeks in there where he got like 14, 15 points, and then this week he had 40. So really weird player. Freiermuth was a guy that was surprisingly very consistent this year and definitely well-deserving of that top 5 spot. But I mean, there was 100-point gap between Kelce in the second place, which was Mark Andrews, who was there despite missing like 2 or 3 weeks with an injury. I think what this really shows with the tight end position is that if you don't get Travis Kelce, there is no point in getting a tight end early. Like, just wait, because all these guys were just, Engram, Freiermuth, these are late round picks. Hawkinson was like a middle of the pack tight end. And Andrews, of course, got hurt. So that definitely took away from some of your wins this year. I really, if you cannot get Travis Kelce in the first 3 rounds, there's no point in taking a tight end until you've filled out most of your team, because it's really just a dart throw with tight ends for the most part. And I think we see it turn out this way almost every year. So for the most part, it's Kelce or bust.
This is the first year where tight end has been almost a complete non-factor in fantasy that I've ever seen. Because, I feel like a lot of it was injuries. You had Darren Waller, Dallas Goedert missing significant time.
Zach Ertz too.
Zach Ertz is out for the year. He's done. So, those 3 guys were being drafted relatively high, expected to do well. And they did well when they were healthy, just not Travis Kelce well. And then they're injured. I know Dallas Goedert and Darren Waller are coming back, I think, this week, but they're not going to crack this top 5. I mean, they missed significant time. I mean, I'd still consider them better than Engram and Freiermuth as fantasy options, but it doesn't really say anything. Other guys just straight up regressed. I mean, you had George Kittle pretty much fall off the face of the planet. He still was like the 11th ranked tight end, but that doesn't mean anything, especially with one clear-cut option, and you could plug anyone in at tight end and probably be fine as long as they were starting for a team.
Yeah, I mean, another one that was like disappointing and really weird was Kyle Pitts. Who was a top 5 tight end coming into the year. Of course, to be fair to him, he got injured, but even when he was on the field, he wasn't putting up that great production. And I mean, you can sort of blame the Falcons system for that and not giving him the ball enough, but it's a really disappointing year for tight ends pretty much all around if you didn't end up with Kelce.
Yeah, no, if you didn't end up with Kelce, it was like whoever. Shout out to TJ Hawkinson, though. He had a pretty solid season. I mean, despite the 100-point gap between Kelce and Andrews, there were still good tight ends this year. TJ Hawkinson was a guy that I had on a few teams. He was very consistent. And I grew to be like a bit of a fantasy fan of his production. So I was happy with that. But now that we're done with the main offensive positions, let's talk about our waiver wire of the year. Who do we think was the best pickup off of waiver wires? And we have a few names we'd like to, nominate for this prestigious award. We have Kenneth Walker, Dameon Pierce, Christian Watson, Justin Fields, Geno Smith, and Trevor Lawrence. These are all guys that we, would probably say they were on waivers to start the year. You pick them up at some point, and they made an immediate impact, turned your team's chances around, maybe even got you into the playoffs, maybe are leading your team to, a great season and everything. But Jack, who is your waiver wire of the year? Who is your waiver wire pickup of the year?
To me, I'm sort of judging this based off of the guy that I think if you're in the playoffs and you have this guy on your team, A, you're starting him this week, and B, he's probably going to make a big impact. And to me, honestly, I think the number one out of all these guys might be Christian Watson, which is pretty crazy to say because at 8 weeks into the year, we're like, this guy's a complete non-factor, this complete draft bust. Why would the Packers waste a 2nd-round pick on him? And then he had that breakout game, I believe it was against the Cowboys, where he had 3 touchdowns and was phenomenal. And he's just been really consistently great ever since then. points per game average wise, he's low key been a wide receiver 1, which is pretty insane for Christian Watson. And I just think that this has become a must start if you're a playoff team. He's been incredibly consistent ever since that. I think, again, it was the Cowboys game. And I think I would argue that this is the biggest waiver wire pickup of the year if you got him, because I don't know that any of the rest of these guys, as great as some of them have been, are going to be making as big of an impact this week for you in your first round of the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you have to look, I get Christian Watson might be the best guy for the playoffs, but I think you have to look at the regular season as a whole when you pick up these guys and how much they impact your chances. So I would like to say 2 guys on this list that I think had the biggest impact overall. First of all, Kenneth Walker, when his name started circulating, you picked him up, made an immediate impact, was a consistent RB2, pretty much the rest of the way, except for the past week or 2. He was a staple of many people's lineups once they picked him up. He was a clear, you clearly started him, plug and play, workhorse for a lot of the season. I'd say he's rookie of the year in my opinion. Just putting it out there. I think he's my rookie of the year just because he was consistently good. He became a mainstay of the Seattle offense, which again was that entire unit you could put on, just waiver wires, except for, besides the wide receivers, Geno Smith's also here. We're not picking him, but Geno Smith finishing as QB6 is absolutely insane. He was right behind Fields, but Justin Fields is my second guy that I'd like to say for waiver wire of the year. Any team that was even remotely QB needy that picked up Justin Fields picked up a potential league winner. From the moment that the Bears finally decided to focus their offense around Justin Fields' strengths, he has been absolutely insane. He's been torching offenses. Every game he's played in has been somewhat of a shootout, so he's putting up fantasy points. The Bears aren't winning, but he's definitely improving every single week that he plays. He's playing really good football, and he ends up as QB5 on the season. And that's a guy that no one drafted, no one believed in. People thought he was a draft bust, and he completely turned around his career, and now he might be the guy for a bit longer in Chicago. So I'd say those 2 are my picks for waiver wire of the year.
Yeah, and I'll since you took 2, I'll throw one more out there. I think you have to shout out Trevor Lawrence. He had an incredible bounce back season after his rookie disaster last year, caused mostly by Urban Meyer. I think at this point it's pretty clear that was a big problem, because this season he has been a bona fide top 10 quarterback in my opinion. And I think that fantasy wise, I think he was QB8, which is really impressive. And he was pretty consistent for the entire season. He had a little bit of a lull after the first 3 or 4 weeks. He had a couple down weeks, but I think he's come back to form at this point. And this is a guy that if you're in the playoffs and he's your starting quarterback, I don't think you have an issue with it whatsoever. And that's a steal. If you can get that off of the waivers, that is an absolute steal. And I think you just give credit where credit's due with Trevor Lawrence, and not to overlook a guy like Geno Smith, who also had a phenomenal season. But I think Trevor Lawrence has solidified himself as a starting fantasy quarterback for this season. And next year, I think he should be drafted as a QB1 in fantasy leagues.
Ooh, I'm not sure if I'm ready to draft him as a QB1 quite yet, or at least spend a high draft pick on him. I'm talking 5th, 6th round.
Well, no, I'm not drafting him in the same place I would draft Mahomes or Josh Allen. I'm just saying that if you're the kind of team that likes to wait on a quarterback and draft him towards the later rounds, you like to take those guys in that QB 6 to 9 range on the draft boards. I think you should absolutely be taking Trevor Lawrence there next year.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And to be fair, Hurts is going to be QB1 next year. So let's just get that out of the way.
Okay. Mr.
And our next and final category, going over these fantasy regular season, best performers, we have the league winners. What player do we think was, the most impactful fantasy football player for the entire year? We have 5 names on here. We have RB2, Josh Jacobs. We have QB1, Jalen Hurts. We also have tight end 1, Travis Kelce. Wide receiver 6, Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I don't know his ranking because it's not that high, but you'll understand why. We also have DeAndre Hopkins here.
Mhm.
So, Jack, who out of these players do you think was the most impactful for a fantasy football team? Which of these players won their league and why?
So I'm gonna go with two guys here. I'll start with my
Okay.
runner up, and for me, that is actually DeAndre Hopkins. Even though he obviously was not ranked as highly as some of these guys by the end of the
Mhm.
season because he was suspended for the first 6 games, but if you were one of those teams, I was not one of these people. I didn't go for this route in any of my leagues. I was not a big believer in Hopkins, but
Mhm.
I'm man enough to admit when I was wrong, and I think I was certainly wrong on Hopkins this season. If you were one of those teams that drafted him in the 6th, 7th, 8th round, waited out for those first 6 weeks, DeAndre Hopkins was a wide receiver one when he got plugged back into the lineup. I mean, he's been, if you look at his points per game average, I think he's averaging somewhere in the high 19s, approaching 20 points per game, which is like really incredible for a wide receiver. And that just you just got an incredible return on your investment if you were one of those teams that took him in the first in the 6th, 7th, 8th round. You got a great return on your investment there. But my league winner, my MVP for fantasy this season, I think you have to have Josh Jacobs there. I
Mm.
mean, what more can you say about the season Josh Jacobs had? I mean, like I sort of mentioned it earlier, in a contract year, he had to prove himself. I think he's going to get paid big time this offseason based on the production that he had. And I mean, he was sort of in the, like what I like to call the RB dead zone, sort of in the middle of these
Mhm.
drafts. Where I usually avoid taking a running back at all costs because they're usually pretty middling. But Josh Jacobs was anything but that this season. He absolutely broke out, showed why he was a first round pick in real life 4 years ago at this point. And I think that he's going to get paid big time this offseason based on his
Mhm.
production, and he's going to win some people some fantasy championships.
Mhm. I certainly like your reasoning, but I'm going a different direction with my league winner. I I don't care that this player was a first round pick in every single league that he was in. He was a first or second round pick, rarely fell outside of the first round. He was far and away the best player in his position, literally 100-point gap between him and the next best player. We mentioned it earlier. My league winner this year is Travis Kelce. He was by far and away the only amazing tight end this year. The only guy you could actually say was competing with top wide receivers as an offensive scorer with his point totals. He's the only weapon that Mahomes truly has right now. I know he has Juju. I know he has Valdez-Scantling. I'm talking about guys he can actually throw to and trust. Travis Kelce is pretty much the only guy that Mahomes has had all season, and he had an amazing season for fantasy. He averaged 19 points. That is unheard of for a tight end to average 19 points a game, almost 20. To have a tight end average 20 points, he's basically a wide receiver at that point. And that's what the Chiefs have been using him as. He's basically been their wide receiver one without being a wide receiver. So anyone who got Travis Kelce is pretty much a playoff team. That man has carried you because there are no other great tight ends. He's completely outscored the competition. So every week, head to head, he was almost always better than his opponent's tight end. So I think just because of that impact compared to the rest of the players in the tight end group, Travis Kelce has to be my league winner. I would also like, Josh Jacobs, probably my second place runner up. I'd say Jalen Hurts is like my third place runner up because while he was the top scorer, Mahomes and Allen weren't leagues like behind him. They were still really good fantasy quarterbacks. Burrow was great. Fields was great. Gino out of nowhere was great. They were all great quarterbacks. You can get a QB1 all the way down to like the 10th ranked quarterback and still be satisfied with that. But yeah, Josh Jacobs being a mid-round steal really helped. But to me, I know he could have been a first round pick in your league, but if you got him, you were set. I'd probably still say I would draft him in the second round just because I need a running back first round almost always. But next year, I will try not to make the same mistake by passing up on him in the first 2 rounds. If he's there, I need to take him.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely understand that logic. I just I don't. It's more of like
We
a.
my biggest
I
thing,
just
we have
think
never seen a player dominate his position, like in position rankings. We've never seen a player have a 100-point gap over the next best player in his position. When has that
no,
ever happened in
no,
fantasy?
no,
Probably
definitely.
never.
I understand that perspective for sure. I just think that having Kelsey it's a luxury, but like it's not a requirement. I think
I
just
never said it
because
was a requirement, but
I mean,
it
no, like
massively
there's
increases
there's
your chance
only
to win your league.
the thing it does. You're right, but there's only one Travis Kelsey, which means that most of your playoff teams are having this similar kind of tight end caliber as you. I think that if you were able to land a guy like Jacobs, if you were able to go for that Hopkins strategy, if you were able to land a guy like Jalen Hurts as the 5th or 6th quarterback off the board, I think that boosts your odds to win the championship much more than having Travis Kelsey does. Because as awesome as Kelsey is in comparison to his competition, that team that took Kelsey in the first, second round sacrificed on other top end talent.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the receivers are a little weaker. Maybe the running backs are a little weaker than the rest of these teams because they spent that high end pick on Travis Kelsey. And,
right.
and that's a fair strategy. Like I'm not faulting the strategy. It's just that Kelsey doesn't set you apart, I think, because the rest of your talent will be weaker. It's the guys that you hit on in those mid to late rounds.
Yeah.
That's what sets you apart and wins your league.
Yeah, I get that. But what I'm just trying to say is, with Travis Kelsey being a 2nd-round pick, you could easily have had a first 4-round draft, right? I'm just going to say first 5-round draft, right? You could have had first 5 rounds. You could have gone Austin Eckler, Travis Kelsey, like Keenan Allen, AJ Brown, and then whatever top quarterbacks available. That's a league-winning team right there. Just that alone. No, I'm telling you, AJ Brown was ranked wide receiver 5, and then I'm pretty sure Keenan Allen was like in the top 10. 2 top 10 receivers, the best running back the best running back this year, the best tight end this year, and probably a top 6 quarterback. That's a league-winning team.
The thing is, unless that team was lucky enough to draft Josh Jacobs, they probably don't have a good RB2. I mean, there's a good
maybe
unless by
even
some
then.
crazy luck that team got Josh Jacobs, which is possible based on the way this year's draft board was.
I'd probably say that team could settle for Miles Sanders and still be a really good team.
Really good, yes, but not setting you above your competition.
That's fair. We could probably debate this all night. But let's move on to our mensch or bench. We do it every single week. Mensch or bench. Do we want to start these guys based off their point totals, point projections, and their opponents, or do we want them to be on our bench?
Yep.
First, we have J.K. Dobbins. Finally, it seems like he's back playing football. It seems like he's been dealing with something every week for the past 2 seasons. He is projected 10.3 points in Cleveland, Ohio against the Browns. Jack, what are your thoughts on J.K. Dobbins?
This is a pretty easy bench for me. He had a great week last week. He looked healthy, or at least as healthy as J.K. Dobbins can be. He looked. And he's got a solid matchup. I don't think the Browns' run defense is good at all. I think he's going to have the potential to run all over them. And especially since it looks like Lamar is going to be out again this week, I am sort of assuming they're going to lean pretty heavily on him. If they've got Huntley in there or potentially even Anthony Brown, then they'll certainly lean on J.K. Dobbins. And I expect a big week from him against this Browns defense. I'm going to go with the mensch, and I honestly don't have much doubt about it.
And I'm honestly with you on this. I mean, this is a Ravens team that's pretty banged up. Definitely going to be relying on the run game a lot more than usual. Browns do not have a stellar run defense unit, so I can definitely see the upside here. I'm going to go with the mensch. I feel like this 10.3 projection is a little bit low for J.K. Dobbins. Definitely more of like a flex option than anything, but I like the upside here. I'm with you on the mensch.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jack, who do we have next for mensch or bench?
Yeah, option number 2, Zay Jones, the hardest worker in the league, according to Derek Carr. That's my favorite line to use. He's going against the Dallas Cowboys this week, projected 13.4 points. Zach, what do you think of Zay Jones?
Man, this is a bit of a tough matchup here. I mean, the Cowboys' defense is arguably one of the best in the league right now. But cornerback is not their biggest strength, and that's who I would assume they would put on, Zay Jones and Christian Kirk, who is the wide receiver 1. So that's probably going to be where Trayvon Diggs is.
They would put their corners on wide receivers.
I know it's groundbreaking analysis here, but the Cowboys cornerback group is not as amazing as their linebacker or defensive line. I feel like Zay Jones can definitely have a big week as long as the Jaguars offensive line protects Trevor long enough. I'm going to go with the mensch here. I like Zay Jones in this matchup against these cornerbacks. I think he has a probable matchup. I think 13.4 is a good line for him. I think that's pretty accurate as to what we could see. So yeah, I'm excited about Zay Jones this week. I think it could be good for him.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to disagree with you here. This is a bench for me. If you can help us. Zay Jones has been solid this season. If you are in dire need of starting a wide receiver, I don't have a massive problem with starting Zay Jones. But if you can avoid it, I would bench him just because something that you sort of mentioned is the Cowboys pass rush versus the Jaguars O-line. I think the Cowboys should absolutely dominate that matchup. And I think that that's going to leave Trevor Lawrence with very little time to get rid of the football this week. And that's just going to be a challenging week for Trevor Lawrence. And it's going to be a challenging week for all of his weapons. And I think as a product of that, having to get rid of the ball quickly, I have a feeling that Zay Jones will not get as many targets as he usually does and will not be able to produce as much as he usually does. For that reason, if you can help it, bench him. If you're desperate, I don't hate starting him. But if you can, I would leave him on the bench.
Jack, are you desperate?
I'm so desperate. I'm starting him in one of my leagues. That's the only reason.
Yeah,
I'm very desperate. But if you can help yourself, leave him on the bench.
I can read you like a book. I can read like a book. I knew you were desperate. You are clearly starting Zay Jones, and I'm telling you, there is a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel with the Zay Jones start there. I think it could be good for him. I think it could.
Oh, I sure hope you're right.
I always am, so it works out. Moving on to our last mentor bench, we're only doing 3. We have Marquise Brown. He's projected 12.6 going against the Denver Broncos in the Mile High Stadium. Jack, the Cardinals are going to be starting Colt McCoy in a football game in 2022. How do you think that will affect Marquise Brown and his fantasy value?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, super unfortunate with the Kyler injury. I mean, you hate to see stuff like that, not only for fantasy, but obviously for Kyler. But it definitely does hurt the outlook on both DeAndre Hopkins and Marquise Brown. And I just think that it's a tough matchup. The Broncos defense is much better than they get credit for. You're on the road. Colt McCoy at quarterback. I think I have to lean towards the bench. It's a similar stance to I had on Zay Jones. If you're desperate, I don't hate the start. But if you can help yourself, I would leave him on the bench. I just don't think it's the best situation for him with Colt McCoy at quarterback and against a tough defense on the road with the altitude. There's just too much going against him for me to confidently say bench on Marquise Brown this week.
And to be honest, I'm with you on this, but mainly because the player from the Cardinals you should be looking to start over anyone else is James Conner. He has greatly benefited right now. He's getting a lot more touches, a lot of screen passes, a lot of simple plays that are going his way. He's getting a lot of production that we haven't seen since 2 seasons ago in fantasy, which was, that was a crazy season for James Conner. Yeah. So I'm going the bench here because I don't think Marquise Brown's really benefiting from anything going on with the Cardinals right now. It's not like D-Hop suddenly hurt and he's number 1 option. He's the 2, arguably 3 with Robbie Anderson there sometimes. It's kind of weird that he's even there.
I don't know about that. He's definitely the 2.
Okay, but still, he's not going to be getting a ton of touches overall. It's going to be James. It's a James Conner led offense now, really. So I'm doubtful about any Cardinals wide receiver right now, even D-Hop, just because of the fall off between Kyler Murray and Colt McCoy. So I am also going to be benching him. Let's move on to our over-under for points this week. We have another 3 interesting names. But first, we have my Eagle. I love this man. Coming back from injured reserve to face the Chicago Bears on Sunday, we have Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles, projected 10.8 points coming off of injury. Jack, what do you think of this matchup?
It always gets me how much Eagles fans love a guy named Dallas. It's always just one of the most enjoyable things for me about observing Eagles fans. But I actually, if he plays, and I'm assuming that he's going to, it sounds like he will. I think this is an over. I think this is going to be a good matchup for him. The Bears defense has not been great this year, especially after they traded away guys like Roquan Smith and Robert Quinn at the deadline. This defense has holes in it. It should be a good matchup for Goddard to pick them apart. And if he's in that lineup, I'm going to go with the over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Eagles open up the practice window for him today. It seems likely that he will play, and if he does, I'm absolutely hammering this over. Not only will the Eagles probably look to give him a touchdown just because he's back, I feel like they would probably write a play, be like, "Hey, you're back. Here's a touchdown." Dallas Goedert and the tight end position as a whole for the Eagles has always been a safety valve. You go to them when your other reads are a little bit covered, and that does happen at times. The Bears defense we know isn't good, but you can always, go with old reliable Dallas Goedert up the middle with a slant route, get some yards and, play well. So I think 10.8 honestly kind of low for him, especially considering that he's returning. He'll be nice and rested, nice and recovered. I pretty much expect him to score a touchdown just because of, him being gone for so long. I feel like it's kind of due. So I am easily taking the over if he's able to play on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Jack, here's one of your favorite guys. Who's our second over-under player?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned him as my favorite waiver wire pickup of the year. It is Christian Watson going against the LA Rams. I think that's on Monday Night Football this week. Projected 12.
Sunday night, I think, but still.
Sunday night?
I don't know.
It is prime time.
One of the primetime games.
Yeah, he's projected 12.4 points against the Rams, probably going up against Jalen Ramsey. Zach, what are your thoughts on Christian Watson in this matchup?
This is such a great matchup for Christian Watson, honestly. I mean, the Rams defense is nothing special this year. This is the worst Super Bowl hangover I have ever seen from a team. Christian Watson should easily tear apart the Rams defense. Give me the easiest over I've probably done in a minute for this show. I feel like Christian Watson has really shown that he has. Next year, he'll be a wide receiver 1 contender. This year, he's good. He's not at that elite level yet because he didn't do it all season, but he is certainly good. He's showing flashes of being a true wide receiver 1 for Green Bay in the future. I like him in this matchup. It's a good matchup for him. No one's really good on the Rams defense, especially at corner. They don't really have anyone. Jalen Ramsey has been awful this year. So Christian Watson, easy over for me.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you again here. I'm going to take the over as well. And honestly, we love to make fun of Trayvon Diggs as burnt toast fan, but I think Jalen Ramsey might have overtaken that title to this point this year. I mean, he really has not been good at all this year. He's had a huge decline. And I think, like you said, the Rams defense has been nothing special this year. They've had a big Super Bowl hangover. I think Aaron Donald is supposed to be out again this week. We should give Aaron Rodgers a lot more time to get the ball out. And yeah, I just see Christian Watson having another one of those good weeks that he's been having lately, and I'm also going to take the over.
Mm-hmm. And finally, we have our favorite name in football, the one, the only, Zonovan Knight.
Let's go.
Zonovan Knight.
Fired up.
Dude, the best name in football right now. The best name in football, Zonovan Knight. I'll never get over that. Zonovan Knight, running back for the Jets, now projected 13.2 against the Detroit Lions. I love this matchup. It could go either way, I think. Jack, what are your thoughts on Zonovan Knight against the Lions?
Yeah. I definitely agree. Could go either way. He's been getting pretty much around 13.2 ever since he's gotten this sort of newfound bell cow role with the Jets, which is like so weird that he's ended up in this position. But he has, and he's become a very viable fantasy option. And, the Lions defense is not great. I mean, it's definitely improved from the beginning of this season, but it's still not incredible, especially against the run. I'm gonna take the over on Zonovan Knight. I really like, football guy. He's a gritty guy. He puts his head down, gets some big yards. He got his first NFL touchdown last week.
Ooh.
I think he continues the hot streak. I think he gets the over here in a pretty decent matchup. And I think that he's going to be a big factor for the Jets in this game, whether or not they end up with the win.
No, I'm completely with you on this. While I do think this matchup could go either way, I'm leaning towards an over. The Lions' run defense is not anything that's, really heads and shoulders above anyone, really. It's fine, it's serviceable, but it's not, I'm not seeing Aiden Hutchinson highlights on my Twitter feed every week. I'm not really seeing that. Zonovan Knight has proven that he's a quality back as a whole. He's going to be very important to this Jets offense now that the quarterback situation is even weirder than it was before. With Zach Wilson, and now Mike White's questionable. Zach Wilson's now the second option again, so maybe we see Zach Wilson again. I don't know. Regardless, I see lots of handoffs in the future. I think Zonovan Knight will have a big week. I'm looking forward to this. I think he'll score. I think he'll get 13.2 is right around where I'd probably put him, but I like the over in this.
Yep. Same here.
I mean, it's Zonovan Knight.
Football guy.
Football guy. Zonovan Knight, football guy. I love that. Finally, to close off our show, we have our team of the week. If we could have one team be an entire fantasy roster, now in the playoffs too, who would you pick to lead you to a championship right now? Who at least this week with this week's matchup? Jack, who is your team of the week this week?
My team of the week this week, I think they're due for a bounce back, although I do think they're a little bit fraudulent. They have been struggling lately, and they've got a good matchup. I'm talking about the Minnesota Vikings. I don't think they're quite as good as their record, but I do think that they have a
fraudulent, really?
They're definitely a little bit fraudulent.
A little bit. They're a lot fraudulent in my eyes.
Okay, I think that's a fair opinion, but I do still think they are a good team. I think they are a playoff caliber team, and I think they're going up against a terrible Indianapolis Colts team. So that should be a recipe for a bounce back after a rough loss to Detroit last week. And the week before, I can't even remember. Oh, the Jets. They played a really close game with the Jets. Mm-hmm. So I think they're due for a bounce back. They've got a good matchup. I'm expecting a big game from Jefferson, as always. Thielen, I think this could be one of his better weeks. Dalvin Cook. Kirk Cousins, if you need a starting quarterback, he's definitely an option this week. Just all around, I think the Vikings have a good game against this Colts team. And look, they may not be as good as their record, but they're good enough to show up when they play a bad team. And I think that's exactly the situation that they have this week. So give me Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's certainly interesting. I mean, I feel like this Minnesota team is not nearly as good as they, as their record. I think they're completely fraudulent. I mean, you're a close game against the Jets. The Jets are playoff contenders. Like, that's embarrassing. Get blown out by Dallas, who's, in my opinion, the clear number 2 team in the NFC. Get blown out by them. And then you lose to the Lions, who are up and coming and arguably now the best team in that division. So I think the Vikings are absolute frauds. That's just me. But my team of the week, I'm going with the Cincinnati Bengals. I know they were your team last week, Jack, but I am taking them for myself. They are playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but the Bengals offense should probably tear them to shreds. The Tampa Bay defense has not been anything super impressive. I mean, they make some good plays, but they haven't really, stopped every team that they've come across or anything. They're not a dominant defense anymore. Come on. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon, T. Higgins, and of course, you never know with Samaje Perine backing them all up. So I feel like it's a really good offensive unit. The Bucs are not good. Honestly, I feel like the best team in that division right now might actually be the Panthers with the momentum they have, which is crazy to say, but if the Panthers somehow win that division, don't be shocked. It'll be because the Bengals absolutely destroy the Buccaneers this week.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really crazy, absolutely wild. But I honestly don't think this is quite as easy of a matchup for the Bengals as you think it is. I think Tampa's defense, I mean, their offense has had more than its fair. Wow, English. It's had more than its fair share of struggles this year. But the defense, honestly, I still think has been a top 10 unit. Maybe not the top 3 unit that it's been in the past, but this season I still think it's been top 10. And while I think the Bengals offense is incredible, and I wouldn't be surprised if they had a good week, I don't know that I would say this is my highlight team of the week matchup, because I do still think the Bucs defense is solid.
Yeah, it's still better than your Vikings pick. And also, we're talking about a top 10-ish defense. I think they're around 10, maybe a little lower, against a top 3 offensive unit. So
Yeah,
I
no.
think I really think that the Bengals have more of an edge than you're giving them credit for. I think you're overhyping the Tampa Bay defense a little bit. They've looked way worse than they have in years past. I think you're overhyping them a little bit based off of their past history recently. But hey, we'll see. Last week, I picked the Dallas Cowboys, and I was like, it'd be nice if they struggled, but I don't expect them to against the Texans. And they completely struggled and faltered and barely won a game that they should have blown out. So, and now everyone doubts the Cowboys, which I'm thrilled about. But still,
and just watch them be looking ahead for that Eagles game. Bold take. They're losing the Jaguars this week, 100%. Book it.
I'm not gonna say nothing if I'm not saying anything because if last week worked, I don't want to say anything right now. So,
oh man, yeah, maybe you should jinx them again. Give me a nice go, Cowboys.
No, I'm good. No, I can't. All right. Jack has mortified me beyond belief. It's been a great show. And we will see you guys next week as we start the fantasy football playoffs. Good luck to everyone in their playoffs and have a good weekend.